My daughter-in-law slapped me in my own living room during my Christmas party, while her mother stood there smiling. My son said nothing, not one word. So I smiled too, because 5 minutes later, I froze the card they'd been living on, and that was only the beginning. Lesson: never mistake kindness for surrender. The slap echoed across my living room, silencing the music at my annual Christmas party. For 1 second, nobody moved. I just stood there in my red sweater, my cheeks stinging from the force of Chloe's hand. My daughter-in-law had just slapped me in front of everyone, and her mother, Brenda, merely smirked. I still remembered the sharp, bitter smell of cigarette smoke floating through my hallway. I had only asked politely, "Brenda, would you mind smoking outside? The ventilation here isn't great." That was it. I said it softly, handing her a small ceramic ashtray to take to the porch. But Chloe suddenly exploded, stepping between us like I had insulted her bloodline. "My mother is not going outside like some stranger," she shouted, her voice shattering the festive atmosphere. "This is Christmas, and she is family. Stop acting like you can humiliate her in front of everyone." Then came the slap. I heard the neighbor from next door gasp. Someone quickly set a cold glass down on the wooden coffee table. My face burned, but honestly, the physical pain wasn't what surprised me. It was the absolute deafening silence from my son, Mark. He stood near the fireplace, staring at his shoes, entirely passive. At 65, after decades as a school administrator, I knew difficult people. I knew exactly what this was. Chloe had been pushing my boundaries for 6 months since they moved in to save money. She slowly took over my kitchen, my laundry schedule, and my quiet peace. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to scream, to cry, to look like the crazy, emotional mother-in-law so she could play the victim. I did not give her that satisfaction. I simply reached up, touched my warm cheek, and smiled at her. That smile made her step back. But 5 minutes later, something happened she never saw coming in her life. Instead of arguing, I turned my back to Chloe and walked straight to the hall closet. I pulled out my heavy winter coat, slipped it on, and picked up my purse. The guests watched me in stunned silence. Mark finally stepped forward, his face pale. "Mom, wait. Where are you going? Don't make a scene." That phrase told me everything he cared more about embarrassment than defending me. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at him and said, "I am going to a hotel for the night. You have guests to entertain." Before he could respond, I opened the front door and stepped out into the freezing December air. 5 minutes after Chloe slapped me, I was sitting in my car at the end of the driveway, logging into my banking app. The joint grocery card they had been abusing was frozen before the last guest even finished their drink. I drove slowly to a quiet hotel a few miles away. Sitting alone on the hotel bed, I did not cry. I had myself. For 6 months, I had cooked their meals, paid the utility bills, and let Chloe treat my house like her personal hotel. She believed her aggressive behavior would eventually wear me down until I simply surrendered the space entirely. She completely miscalculated. I opened my purse and pulled out my laptop, but not to freeze the card. That had already been done from my car, 5 minutes after Chloe slapped me. This time, I downloaded the last 6 months of charges. Restaurants, clothes, delivery orders, holiday supplies. Every line reminded me that I had been calling it help while they had been treating it like permission. Then, I emailed the security company that monitored my house and requested a full front door code reset for 8 the next morning. When I closed the laptop, I felt something I had not felt in months' space. I drank a very warm glass of water, turned off the bedside lamp, and finally rested. When morning came, the real lesson would begin. At exactly 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was my son, Mark. I let it ring. He called twice more before sending a text message. "Mom, the front door code isn't working. Chloe, Brenda." And I stepped out for coffee. And now none of us can get back inside. "Are you punishing us?" I finished breakfast, paid the bill, and drove home. When I finally arrived, all three of them were standing on the porch. Brenda was shivering and glaring at me. Chloe had her arms crossed, and Mark looked like he wanted to disappear. I walked past them, used my physical key to unlock the door, and stepped inside. They followed me in without a word. The house was a complete disaster. Empty plates, sticky floors, and trash bags were piled near the kitchen island. Chloe dropped onto the sofa and started scrolling through her phone, clearly expecting me to apologize. "You changed the code," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. "We have been standing outside for 20 minutes. I set my keys on the counter. "Yes," I said calmly. "It is my security system. I update the codes regularly for basic household safety and security." I did not offer her the new code. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and began putting my expensive groceries into a large plastic bin. I carefully carried the heavy bin to my private master bedroom, placed it inside my closet, and locked the door. Then, I lowered the living room thermostat to a practical temperature. Chloe watched me, her mouth slightly open. She finally realized I was not crying, and I was not arguing. I was simply shifting the environment. "If you want it warmer, you can buy a space heater," I said softly. She immediately stood up angrily, aggressively grabbing her expensive designer purse. She was about to discover another very unpleasant, immediate financial reality. Exactly 30 minutes later, Chloe stomped back into the house, her face flushed with fury. She held her smartphone out, waving it wildly like a weapon. "My card was declined at the grocery store. The cashier looked at me like I was a criminal." I kept wiping the counter. "It is not your card," I corrected her gently. "It is my credit card. You are simply an authorized user. Or rather, you were an authorized user." Mark quickly hurried downstairs, drawn by the sound of his wife's escalating voice. "Mom, what is going on? Why are you acting like this today? Chloe's mom is visiting, and we need groceries." I rinsed the sponge in the sink and dried my hands on a towel. I looked directly at my grown son. "Mark, you are 32 years old. You both have full-time jobs. You moved in here to save money for a down payment, not to live completely free of charge while disrespecting the homeowner." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Chloe crossed her arms. "You are just bitter because I stood up for my mother." "You struck my face," I stated matter-of-factly. "In my own home, I am not bitter." "Chloe, I am simply closing the bank. I will absolutely no longer fund the comfortable lifestyle of someone who physically assaults me." Mark weakly tried to play the peacemaker, a habit he learned to avoid conflict. "Mom, please. She was just emotional. Let's just turn the card back on and talk about this later." I picked up my purse and slowly pulled out a single piece of printed paper, sliding it across the granite counter toward him. It was a spreadsheet. "This is what you owe for the past 6 months, I said. "Utilities, groceries, delivery charges, and everything you put on my card after I told myself I was only helping." His eyes moved to the bottom of the page. The total was $4,860. For the first time that morning, Mark had nothing to say. The next afternoon, I returned from running errands to find Brenda watching television in my favorite armchair. Her dirty shoes were propped up on my wooden coffee table. Chloe was in the dining room, unboxing new decorations she had purchased with her own money. I did not say a word to either of them. Instead, I walked straight upstairs to the spare room. When they moved in, I had allowed Chloe to use my sewing room as her home office. Over time, she had completely taken it over, repainting the walls without asking and throwing away my fabric bins. I quietly grabbed several large, heavy-duty garbage bags from the hallway closet. I walked straight into the room, unplugged her computer monitor, and carefully set it in the hallway. Then, I began packing her decorative desk accessories, her planners, and her files into the bags. I worked without anger. I carried everything downstairs and placed it neatly near the front door. Chloe heard the heavy footsteps and walked over, her face dropping in shock. "What are you doing?" "That is my office." I calmly folded the remaining empty bags and placed them in my pocket. "It is my sewing room," I replied plainly. "And since you now owe me for 6 months of bills, I need my space back to organize my own records, supplies, and storage boxes. Your things are packed by the door. Nothing is missing, and nothing of yours is being sold." "You absolutely cannot do this to me," she yelled. "I live here. You cannot just take my space away." I walked past her, heading toward the kitchen. "I am not taking your personal space. I am reclaiming my property. You are a guest who overstayed her welcome and assaulted her host. You simply no longer have any office privileges here." I left her standing there, staring at the boxes. That evening, Mark came into the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. He looked exhausted. "Mom, Chloe is threatening to leave and take her mother to a hotel, but we do not have the money for it right now. Can you please just apologize so we can go back to normal?" I set the knife down and wiped my hands. "Apologize for what?" "Mark," he rubbed his temples, "for making her feel unwelcome. You already know exactly how she gets. She is stressed about her job, and her mom being here is a lot of pressure. Just tell her you are sorry about the card and the room, and I will make sure she does not yell anymore." I looked at my son, feeling a profound sense of clarity. For many years, I had constantly shielded him from difficult consequences. I had made his life comfortable, hoping he would grow into a strong, independent man. Instead, he had willingly married a harsh woman who controlled him, and he expected me to submit to her just to make his life easier. "Mark, I am not angry," I said quietly, "but I am entirely finished. I will never apologize to a woman who physically hit me. I will not fund a lifestyle you cannot afford. And I will not hide in my own home to keep the peace." I opened a drawer, pulled out a simple, typed document, and handed it to him. "This is a very standard, practical, month-to-month lease agreement. If you and Chloe wish to remain in this house, rent is $2,000 a month, due on the 1st. If you do not sign it by tomorrow morning, I expect you to pack." He blankly stared at the paper, looking completely and utterly defeated. Cold reality had finally arrived at our door. The very next morning, the signed lease was nowhere on the kitchen counter. Chloe walked right past me, tightly holding her warm coffee mug, wearing a smug expression. She thought I was bluffing. She was wrong. I did not ask about the lease. I did not mention the rent. I simply picked up my phone and called a local contractor I had spoken to weeks ago. By noon, a large work van pulled into the driveway. 2 men carrying heavy tools and thick tarps walked directly into the kitchen. Chloe rushed downstairs, panic flashing across her face. "What is happening? Who are these people?" I stood by the refrigerator, holding a clipboard. "I am having the house prepared for listing." I answered casually. The kitchen cabinets are being repaired, the walls are being touched up, and the rooms are being cleared for professional photos. The water may be off for a few hours, but everything will be usable again by tonight. Listing, she shrieked. What are you talking about? I signed the paper for the contractor without looking at her. I am talking about taking care of my property. As I clearly mentioned yesterday, you are no longer welcome to treat this house as if it belongs to you. I grabbed my coat and purse. I am going to the city to visit a friend for a few days. The trusted workers have strict instructions to lock up when they finish at 5. I walked out the door, leaving her standing among drop cloths, paint cans, and workers who no longer treated her like the owner. When I finally returned 3 days later, the big house was remarkably quiet. The kitchen was clean, repaired, and almost unrecognizable without Chloe's clutter spread across every counter. But that preparation work was only the temporary distraction. The real plan had been set in motion long before the Christmas party. Months ago, when Chloe first started making passive-aggressive comments about taking over the master bedroom. I saw the writing on the wall. I knew deeply that they would never actually leave willingly. So, I had already quietly met with a top real estate agent. I had already signed the listing agreement a week before Chloe ever slapped me. The party was supposed to be my final holiday celebration in this house. Chloe's assault only accelerated my timeline. I walked into the living room to find Mark sitting on the sofa, holding a glossy brochure. He looked up, his eyes red and confused. Mom, there is a lockbox on the front door and a sign in the yard. Chloe quickly came marching downstairs, her mother trailing very closely behind her. You are selling the house, Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. Where are we supposed to go? I set my travel bag down on the floor and took off my coat. That is entirely up to you, I said evenly. The entire property is now officially on the housing market. The first open house is scheduled for this Sunday. I fully expect the property to be completely spotless. You cannot do this to your own son, Brenda finally chimed in, pointing a shaking finger at me. I looked at Brenda, then at Chloe, and finally at Mark. I own this house, I said simply. I am happily downsizing to a much smaller, peaceful condominium downtown. I have already secured my new place. What you three do next is your own responsibility. Their control shattered. Sunday morning finally arrived with bright, crisp, beautiful winter sunlight. The real estate agent, a sharp woman named Sarah, arrived early to set up her signs. Chloe and Brenda had spent the entire morning complaining, threatening to stay in their pajamas to ruin the open house. I did not argue. I simply walked into the freshly cleaned kitchen and informed them that any interference would be documented. And Sarah would stop the showing until my attorney was contacted. They quickly saw the absolute, cold seriousness in my eyes and finally retreated to the guest room, slamming the door. By noon, several potential buyers were walking through my clean hallways. Mark stood awkwardly in the corner of the living room. Watching strangers admire the space he thought he would eventually inherit for free. A young, happy couple stopped near him, admiring the large bay windows. It is a beautiful home, the woman said cheerfully. Are you the owner? Mark swallowed hard, looking down. No, my mother is... Just then, Chloe burst out of the guest room, unable to handle being ignored. She marched straight up to the surprised couple. You should know the plumbing here is terrible. She lied loudly, hoping to scare them away. I immediately stepped forward calmly, handing the couple a glossy spec sheet. Please excuse the interruption, I said with a polite, professional smile. The current occupants will be leaving within 30 days. I personally handed them a formal written notice to vacate this morning. Chloe froze. The couple exchanged an uncomfortable look, But Sarah immediately stepped in with the inspection summary and repair records. "The plumbing was checked last month," she said smoothly. "Everything is documented." The couple relaxed, thanked her, and continued upstairs. I turned to Chloe. There were no hidden cameras, no dramatic legal battles, and no screaming matches. Just a very quiet, undeniable, permanent transfer of power. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the formal 30-day notice to vacate, and placed it gently in her hand. 30 days. "Chloe," I whispered. "Start packing." She just looked down at the paper, entirely defeated by simple, cold, practical reality. Exactly 30 days later, the large house was entirely, completely empty. The buyers had made an excellent cash offer above the asking price, and the closing process was remarkably smooth. Mark and Chloe, faced with the undeniable reality of the situation, had no choice but to scramble. Without my generous financial support or free, comfortable housing, they could only afford a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. Brenda eventually had to move back to her own home state, complaining bitterly the entire time. On my final morning in the house, I walked through the empty rooms. The space felt large, echoing with memories, but I felt no sadness. I only felt an overwhelming sense of profound relief. I confidently handed the metal keys to Sarah, the real estate agent, and drove to my new downtown condominium. It was much smaller, but it was absolutely, undeniably perfect. The walls were painted a soft blue, the small kitchen was brand new, and best of all, it was completely mine. I set my bags down and opened the balcony doors, letting the fresh air inside. My cell phone rang loudly on the clean kitchen counter. It was Mark. I slowly answered it on the third ring. "Mom?" he said, his voice sounding tired and small. "We are unpacking. Chloe is really stressed. Do you think we could maybe come over for dinner tonight?" I smiled gently, looking out at the bright, beautiful city skyline. "Not tonight, my dear Mark," I replied softly. "I am settling into my new space. We can meet for coffee next week, just the two of us." There was a long pause on the line before he finally agreed. I hung up the phone and walked into my kitchen to make a cup of tea. I had not maliciously destroyed my family. I had simply, practically rebuilt my personal boundaries. And in doing so, I had finally, truly saved myself.